When Islam Makhachev walks inside the octagon at UFC 330, it will have been exactly 3,969 days since his last and only professional MMA loss. He has built up a resume that challenges for the title of greatest of all time, and from the moment he stepped inside the UFC, we knew that he was cut from a different cloth. But there are tests, and then there are history-altering, legacy-defining challenges, and what Islam faces at UFC 330 happens to be the latter. 18 professional MMA bouts in his UFC career, and not one poses a threat as big as Ian Garry. So today we're going to do a deep dive to Islam Makhachev versus Ian Garry and find out exactly why this is a fight that Islam Makhachev has never seen before. So before we break down exactly why Ian Garry is such a complex threat for Islam Makhachev to solve, we first need to understand what makes Makhachev so effective, so dominant, why he's been undefeated inside over a decade in the most competitive promotion in mixed martial arts. There's, a couple key factors that make the Caucasus region wrestling style so effective in MMA. So we're going to break that down, how Islam Makhachev utilizes, his abilities, his advantages in fights, and how those have played out in some of his notable wins. The key similarity in all of these wins is Makhachev's ability to manage a fight. He creates urgency for his opponents, whether that be urgency to stand up, urgency to find a finish, urgency to create a moment. Makhachev is always in control of the pace of a fight. The three key fights I want to break down are his fights against Charles Oliveira, Alexander Volkanovski the first time, and Dustin Poirier. Now, obviously, wrestling has been at the forefront of his attack and approach on all of these matchups and, all of his fights in his career, but it's interesting to see how it's impacting all these opponents differently. But at the end of the day, you can always tell that Islam Makhachev wants to use his wrestling to manage the fight, and that is what he does in all of them. So against Charles Oliveira, he makes it very clear in the first round that Oliveira's ground game will be nullified for the most part in this fight. This creates a lot of doubt and urgency for Oliveira to find a plan B, but in the fight, in the moment, he can't. He freezes up, and this creates a lot of openings for Islam Makhachev on the feet. Oliveira, who normally moves forward and just berserks and goes at you, throws a shit ton of volume, is now hesitant on the feet to throw. Islam Makhachev finds him in that hesitancy, gets him hurt, and on the ground finds a submission to beat Charles Oliveira. I think at the time, especially, I think Oliveira's wrestling has now improved, but at the time, Oliveira had a really tough stylistic matchup with Islam Makhachev because, his wrestling and control is always in the back of your mind. He knows that, he can always get you down and hold you there if needed. Maybe he doesn't find a finish, but he can definitely take that round off you if needed. And I think that is the problem that a lot of these opponents face against Islam Makhachev, and that is his biggest threat. His biggest threat is not, finding a submission, the darts. Obviously, these are big threats, but in the back of every fighter's mind, they know that Islam Makhachev, if all his goal was to bank the round, he'll find a way to bank the round with control, with his wrestling. And that makes you want to do something about it because you know that at the end of the day, he's just going to bank rounds if that is his only thing to do. And he's really good at doing that. This happened against Dustin Poirier as well. In the Dustin Poirier fight, Poirier was doing a great job. Poirier's takedown defense surprised everyone, including Islam Makhachev himself. It surprised him in that fight. His get-ups were good. His takedown defense was good. But at the end of the day, Makhachev is relentless, man. And on the feet, you can tell Poirier has to come in range. That's his striking style. When Poirier is in range, he's having some success, throwing some decent amount of shots at Islam Makhachev, but he can't sit on any power. The second he sits on any power and the speed goes away, the second he gives Makhachev, a millisecond extra to kind of get his ground game going, Islam Makhachev is going to level change, which is exactly what he did. Against Poirier, Islam Makhachev managed the fight tremendously because, even though Poirier did stifle a bunch of takedowns, Islam Makhachev was able to keep the strike numbers close, go back and forth with Poirier. And then at the end of the day, you get a minute and a half of control time, 2 minutes of control time in the round. You kind of have to score it towards Islam Makhachev. There's not much you can do. So I think against Charles Oliveira and Dustin Poirier, Islam Makhachev did an insane job in, managing these fights, managing these rounds. Like I said, I think in the back of the mind, it is that, Islam Makhachev can take the round off you with control if needed. And that is actually the biggest threat to all of these guys. That is what's creating this urgency. And it's interesting to see because I think Alexander Volkanovski, while Makhachev did an immensely good job against, at the time, the pound for pound number one fighter in doing this exact thing, Alexander Volkanovski did give us a little bit of the blueprint as to, what Islam struggles with. And maybe Ian Garry is someone that has similar traits and can kind of execute a very similar game plan. So there's really two key things that Alexander Volkanovski did extremely well in his fight against Islam Makhachev. Now remember, good takedown defense, good submission defense, this is going to be table stakes. You have to have a really competent level of these two things in order to even have a chance to beat Islam Makhachev. But at this level, with a fighter like Ian Garry that he's facing up against, and obviously in that first fight with Volkanovski, these guys had that level. And clearly, even with Dustin Poirier, his takedown defense had evolved to a level that surprised everyone in that matchup, even Makhachev himself. Now, outside of this, the next threat that you have to really nullify is the confidence Islam Makhachev has that he can bank the round on you no matter what. He can force wrestling, he can force control time, he can force takedowns in the worst case scenario to just bank the round on you. And that is his worst case scenario. Now, whether he, knocks you out, finds a submission, completely dominates you, that's kind of the choices he's up against. But like banking the round is kind of like a given for Islam Makhachev. You got to make sure he's not confident that that is what he's going to do in that specific scenario. Now, a couple things Volkanovski did really well in order to kind of, make that a lot harder for Islam Makhachev. I think the first thing is being able to fight moving backwards and moving side to side. Now, what this does is that, if Islam Makhachev wants to force wrestling, if he can't find, really solid entries or level change opportunities, then he has to just kind of force that on you in order to, get his control time, bank that for the round. Now, Volkanovski did a really good job of being able to fight going backwards, fight going left, fight going right. And this just gives Islam Makhachev a lot of different looks, makes him think, keeps him guessing. And that makes it hard to kind of force wrestling and be like in the back of his mind, I'm going to bank this round no matter what. The other thing that Volkanovski did really well, that Dustin Poirier and and honestly, no high level opponent of Islam Makhachev has had good range management. Dustin Poirier is a dirty pocket boxer. He's really good in that boxing range, but he doesn't have nearly as much to offer from further out. Charles Oliveira is just a berserker. He moves forward, he stays in range. We saw how he fought someone like Ilya Topuria. Even against Islam Makhachev, Charles Oliveira is not someone that can keep you out at range. Now, Volkanovski, funnily enough, even though he's a shorter fighter, he's a smaller fighter from the weight class below. He's one of the best range and distance managers in the entire UFC. He can leg kick you on the outside. When he's in, he's in. When he really wants to be out, he can be out. And it's really funny because if you look at it, I almost think that there were points in that fight where Alexander Volkanovski got overzealous and stayed in range for too long. And that's when Islam Makhachev had any success on the feet against him. Islam Makhachev dropped Volkanovski a couple times. Volkanovski wobbled Islam Makhachev a couple times. But, when you look at it, when Volkanovski wobbled Islam Makhachev, he was first to the exchange. He got there first. When Islam Makhachev hurt Volkanovski, it was the other way around. Volkanovski got there first, was in there. He stayed his welcome a little bit too long, and Islam Makhachev was able to catch him on the way out if he didn't, leave right away. So that's one thing that's really interesting because Volkanovski, I think, is a little bit better than that, where he should have gotten out right away. If he was in, out, we could have potentially been seeing a little bit different where, he doesn't get wobbled or knocked down as much. Now, it's interesting because, these are things that, when you talk about, you say Ian Garry might be really good at them, which is why I think this matchup against Ian Garry is so compelling, which is why I think a win over Ian Garry for Islam Makhachev will answer a lot of questions for me. Because if you look at it, out of his high level wins, which I've noted, which is the Dustin Poirier win, the Charles Oliveira win, and the first Volkanovski win, the reason why it's hard for me to, the JDM win, I just don't put any stock into that whatsoever. I'm very low on JDM. And the second Volkanovski win, Volkanovski took that fight on like an 8-day notice. It was supposed to be the rematch against Charles Oliveira. I actually went to that fight in person, and Volkanovski ended up picking up that fight on an 8-day notice because Oliveira got injured. It's really tough for me to kind of put a lot of stock in that. You're fighting the best fighter in the world. You need more preparation time than 8 days for sure. So it's hard to put that. But in his 3 high level fights, I think that, Islam Makhachev has won in his career. Charles Oliveira, terrible at distance and range management. Dustin Poirier just doesn't have much to offer at range. He wants to be inside. Alexander Volkanovski actually can manage range on the feet. Ian Garry actually can manage range extremely well on the feet as well. So I think those two things of being able to move backwards and still fight on the back foot, and then also being able to maintain distance really well and actually have stuff to offer in both of those scenarios, make it really tough for Islam Makhachev to, in the back of his mind, have that one thing, which is if this round isn't going my way, I will force some grappling, force a bunch of control time, even if it doesn't get me anywhere, even if, I don't really get a submission, I don't do too much damage off of it. I know I can, just ruin the other fighter's morale. I can make sure that he knows and I know that at any point in time, I can pick up 2 minutes of this round. And that's just the way I work. That's because my wrestling is so high level. And Alexander Volkanovski is probably the only one that kind of took that away from him. Dustin Poirier's takedown defense was really good. But I think at the end of the day, even Dustin Poirier, he knew that if he didn't sit on any of those punches, if he didn't kind of throw with any power, Islam Makhachev was just going to slowly pull away in the fight. And as he was doing, I think Poirier did a really good job, a really valiant effort. But on the scorecards, Makhachev was still controlling and still managing that fight really well. It was only against Volkanovski in that first one where we really saw, Islam Makhachev being a scenario where he can't just bank and pick up the round with forced wrestling if he has to. He has to kind of actually strike with Volkanovski, not like strike with Poirier the way he was, where he's striking with Poirier, but there's a bunch of level changes in the middle. The round is always going towards Islam Makhachev because of those level changes, because of the control time, and there's not really much to score it for Dustin Poirier. Volkanovski was the only person that really mitigated that one threat of actually being able to control a fight over Islam Makhachev, control a pace. And obviously, Makhachev still won that fight. He still outdid Alexander Volkanovski in that realm, but Volkanovski showed the blueprint and it actually exists. I think those two things are key factors. So it's going to be interesting to break down how Ian Garry approaches those two things and if you believe that he can actually execute on them as well. And that is exactly why this matchup is so complex for an Islam Makhachev. Ian Garry does the two things that Volkanovski set out in his blueprint better than Volkanovski almost, and has the physical traits to back it up to a point that Makhachev has never seen before. Yes, Volkanovski is one of the best range managers in the UFC, but honestly, so is Ian Garry. The only difference in this matchup, Ian Garry is going to be taller and rangier than Islam Makhachev. So Ian Garry is going to be in range when Makhachev isn't. Volkanovski had to be very careful, and honestly, that was part of his downfall because when Volkanovski was in range, so was Makhachev. But this time, Ian Garry will be in range in moments, and Makhachev won't be able to throw from there. So Ian Garry is going to be able to fight off the back foot, going backwards, going forward, going side to side. Ian Garry has all the movement. On top of that, Ian Garry, I also think, is going to be the faster fighter here. Ian Garry is going to be there 1 second, he's going to be gone the next. He's a tough guy to hit. So, when I really break this down, I find that part really interesting. Like I said, if you go look at Islam Makhachev's career, all the high level wins he has, these guys are high level, of course, but stylistically, they give Islam Makhachev his biggest advantage, which is fight management, being able to let you know, like, hey, you got 5 rounds in here, you got to win. You're basically going to start each round down a minute and a half on control time, and you have to work your way back into that round. So you're always fighting from behind when you're fighting an Islam Makhachev. Now, Volkanovski, like I said, was the one person to kind of take that away from him. Ian Garry, I think, is going to be someone that can definitely take that away from him. But like I said, with all the physical traits that Volkanovski didn't have, I think this is going to be extremely compelling. I think someone who can manage range, who can be quicker, is going to be extremely compelling for Islam to kind of break down. Now, obviously, there's going to be a caveat to this. We saw, the sole loss on Ian Garry's career, which is Shavkat Rakhmonov, beat him via control time. I mean, not much happened in that fight. Obviously, you saw Ian Garry had some really solid takedown defense in that matchup. I believe he only got really taken down and controlled on the ground in the fourth round. But outside of that, the other control time that Shavkat racked up was up against the fence. So it's going to be really interesting because, can Islam Makhachev do the exact same thing? If I was to caveat this, I would say yes. Islam Makhachev's path to victory here could look similar to Shavkat's. But honestly, when you think about that Shavkat fight, that wasn't a very, compelling victory for Shavkat Rakhmonov. Yes, he won. Yes, he outcontrolled Ian Garry, but it was up against the fence for the most part. Garry's takedown defense obviously is clearly at a very competent level based on that matchup. And now when you look at it for this one, Islam Makhachev is not going to be as big, strong, and physically imposing as Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat Rakhmonov is a true welterweight. And this is going to be the last thing is that this is Islam Makhachev's first and main test at welterweight. I don't put stock in the JDM win. His build isn't even like that big for a welterweight. He's pretty much the same build as Islam Makhachev. And JDM's, takedown defense and just grappling level is just not competent enough to even keep up with an Islam Makhachev. We saw someone like a Basel Hafez, lose to JDM on a split decision. And, Basel Hafez picked up a round and then a little bit of another one with control time. Islam Makhachev is a completely different level. So when you have stuff like that, you know that the gap between JDM's grappling and Ian Garry's grappling should be way too large. And it's going to be interesting. I think kicking is a big part of both their games. But with Ian Garry being so good at range management, so quick, can Islam Makhachev get his kicking game going? I think it's going to be tough. I think that Ian Garry's range is going to be a lot further. So he's not like JDM where you can count. Now you're like, oh, has Islam Makhachev developed a low kick at this point in his game? Like, yes, his leg kick was developed and showed really well, in that fight against JDM. But JDM is a boxer. He wants to be in range. Similarly with Charles Oliveira or a Dustin Poirier. Charles Oliveira obviously more of a Muay Thai fighter. But that being said, Oliveira just comes forward, doesn't manage range. Dustin Poirier wants to be in the pocket, wants to be close, wants to box with you. Those kicks are there. So a big part of Islam Makhachev's game on the feet is kicking, but Ian Garry can kick you from further than you can kick him. So that's going to be very interesting for me to note. On top of that, can Ian Garry get his kicking game going off? Because Islam Makhachev, obviously that will open the level change opportunities for Makhachev to get in that matchup. So there's going to be some interesting things. I think there's definitely things that go Makhachev's way. in the sense of, we saw Ian Garry controlled up against the fence. We saw that, you can kind of push him up there if that is your only game plan. But that being said, it took everything from Shavkat to win that one in a very close 3-2 decision, which is why I think that you go into this fight and, we go into the second and third round, and that, given guarantee that Islam Makhachev can bank a couple minutes of control time on you per round, so you have to fight back. The second that goes away from Islam, I think things are going to look very, very interesting in this matchup. So I'm going to look for Islam to do a bunch of stuff up against the cage. I'm very curious to see how the kicking game works because I don't think Makhachev's kicking game is going to be nearly as impactful from the range that Ian Garry will fight at. But I also think that, Ian Garry's kicks will probably be nullified in its own because that's going to open level change opportunities for Makhachev. So it's a very interesting fight on both sides of the coin. If I had to give you a prediction today, the more I talk about it, I kind of want to pick Ian Garry to win this one for the exact reasons that I've just been mentioning for the last little bit of this video. And I think that with those physical traits, with this being his actual first test at welterweight, I think Ian Garry has the tools to take that big threat away from Islam Makhachev, which is, managing the fight and winning the rounds or almost being a lock guarantee to win the round. I think that Ian Garry can take that away. And the second he takes that away, I think things are going to change really fast in the fight. So give me Ian Garry to have a very methodical approach to this fight, fighting from the back foot, moving side to side, tons of movement, being quick, being in, being out, being really hard to hit, being faster than Makhachev, being longer than Makhachev. I think those are the things that are going to serve him really well here. Makhachev's going to have to force a lot of wrestling in this one. That's just the way I see it. And honestly, forcing wrestling at a true weight class above is going to be a really interesting problem for Makhachev to solve. I don't know if he can solve it at this one. Like I said, he looked really good against JDM, but it's just something that I can't put too much stock into. So I'm going to have to go ahead and pick Ian Garry to win this one for now. The odds are going to look cool. Maybe I'll put some money down on it, but it's going to be an interesting matchup. I think if Makhachev gets this win, it's probably going to be the best win on his resume up to date. I know the first Volkanovski win was really good, and maybe that one still kind of goes over this one, but I think it's either the best or the second best win on his resume if Makhachev can get it done at UFC 330 against Ian Garry.